Welcome, BookTube, to another Poetry Thursday. I'm going to be looking at a biblical psalm from Tanakh today for you.
I like to read, you do too. Let's get ridiculous.
I did this sort of hermeneutical analysis whew, more than a decade ago now. So some of these phrases might trip up my tongue a bit, and a lot of this vocabulary I haven't used since then. And there's even a couple of the concepts that even I'm like, what was I talking about there? So don't be intimidated, but hopefully you get a little something out of it. I do want to tell you the works cited in it. It's A. Anderson's 1972 Book of Psalms from Oliphant out of UK. Birch Bruggenham Fredheim Peterson's 1999 Theological Introduction to the Old Testament out of Abingdon Press in Tennessee. Gottwald Norman, 1985 Hebrew Bible Socio-Literary Introduction from Fortress Press in PA. Rogerson and McKay's 1977 Psalms 51 to 100. Cambridge University Press, New York. Mueller, Carol Stuhlmuller, 1983 Psalm 2. Glazier, Delaware. M. Tate's 1990 World Biblical Commentary from Word Books, Texas, and A. Weisvesier's 1962 The Psalms and Commentary in Westminster, PA. Here we go. This is called Reading Psalm 89 Backwards. Psalm 89 is a complicated psalm. Birch et al., 1999, classified it variously as one of petition or thanksgiving, 2020, lament, 2080, or even enthronement, 2020. Those are page numbers, so I'm going to omit those from now on. Boat, 1984, considers the third Psalter, which ends with Psalm 89, a collection from the Temple Singer. The word throne does appear in verses 4, 14, 29, 36, and 44, and crown in verses 19, 27, and 39, although mainly as synecdoche for kingdom. This psalm's most distinctive feature is its poetic rendering of the Davidic covenant, which is of an Abrahamic type, unconditional, contra the imperative Sinaitic, which Gottwald, 1985, compares to the Hittite royal grant. The character of lament marks this psalm as post-exilic. I do not find for a ritual reading, e.g., the king Baal abased at New Year's. Boat, 1984, provides the following typology for a lament, all of which occur in Psalm 89, albeit in reverse order. A, an address to God. B, the lament itself. C, confessions of trust in God and petition for relief. D, exclamation of certainty that the psalmist's prayer has been or will be heard. And E, the vow of praise. So we're going to start now with the vow of praise. So these have little headings. So that's Hesed. Hesed, Psalm 89 begins with the vow of praise. I will sing of your steadfast love forever. Steadfast love, Hesed, is the major theme of Psalm 89 and pairs with faithfulness, Munah. These are Hebrew, the italic words, if you can see them. Steadfast love occurs in verses 1, 2, 14, 24, 28, 33, and 49, and is followed by faithfulness in verses 1, 2, 5, 8, 14, 24, 33, and 49. These are associated in the opening with duration. Here we have a footnote. RSV translation obfuscates the way establish and make firm, bana, kun, in verse 2 are reversed, kun, bana, in verse 4, via the poetic technique of chiasm from the Greek letter X. That's Stuhlmeyer, 1983. Now we're back to the main text. Forever, olam, is the kataphora in 1a, 2a, and 4a, with synonymous parallel all generations at 1b and 4b, and at 2b, a synthetic parallel with heavens. What takes the place of the Hesed motif in 3a? It is the covenant, verses 3, 34, 39, and in place of a qualifier in 3b, we have David. He's called servant David, verses 3, 20, 49, and David alone in verse 35, with servant, Ebed, following in verse 39. Key is a familiar feature of Psalms. We have one in verse 2 to begin, then verse 5. Let the heavens praise. Anderson, 1972. I think we must let stand the assembly, verse 5, and council, verse 7, of holy ones, B'nai Elohim, literally sons of God, and not reduce them to angels, much less temple musicians. They remind us of one of the major mysteries of the Hebrew Bible. The God of hosts, verse 8, is the only God, and he is better than all the rest. The rhetorical questions of verses 6 and 8 are echoed by rhetorical questions near the end of the psalm in verse 48. Next section, strong is your hand. The exclamation of certainty begins at verse 9 and ends with verse 18. How is God characterized? This section focuses on the Creator. Later, God is shown in relation to his people, working in history. The unifying motif is one of strength, and for this we need an anthropomorphic God with an arm, a mighty arm, verse 10. You have a mighty arm, Zorah. Strong is your hand, high is your right hand, verse 13. In verse 21, the hand and arm are put on the anointed's head. In verse 25, the hand and right arm are David's, but in verse 42, the right hand God exalts is of his foes. God removed the scepter from his hand, verse 44. The creation verses accumulate. Water, verse 9, heaven and earth, verse 11, light, verse 15. Rahab may stand for Egypt, or may represent the monster of Job, akin to Marduk's Tiamat. Tabor and Hermon are mountains, and here we have a footnote. Verse 12 has the variant Zephon and Yamin, mountains, for the north and the south, whereas Rogerson and McKay, 1977, give Zaphon and Ananias, with Amanos, a corruption of the Hebrew for right hand. Resuming the main text, righteousness and justice, verse 14, are a word pair. Through syntagmatic parallelism, verse 16 pairs righteousness with your name. First, foreshadowing that God's hand may justly chastise as well as create or caress. The hand is a symbol of strength. Another is the horn, verse 17 and 24. We have light and countenance in parenthetic parallel with happy people and the festal shout, verse 15. The hand can also shield, verses 18, and swear oaths. The cadence of verse 15b, who walk, O Lord, in the light, will be echoed at the end of the psalm. This psalm must be heard out loud. Next section now is going to bring us to the middle. Remember, these are in reverse order. That's the covenant. The confession of trust in God runs from verse 19 to 37. The petition must wait. This is a poetic rendering of the covenant from 2 Samuel 7. The vision, therefore, is Nathan's. Follows a series of anaphoras in I, verses 19, 20, 23, 25, 27, 29, which, except verse 20 for 21, my hand, my arm, passing to David, offers us an almost perfect AABC, ADAE, pattern. Thereafter, the anaphora becomes if, and the A lines, as in verse 28, forever, are modified. Then I, verse 32, but I, verse 33, first not, once and for all I, verse 33, not lie to David, with the main not at verse 34. I will not violate my covenant. The ending of this section has it instead of I, referring to David's line. The king is as a child to the father, Abba, verse 26, and sometimes strays, as children do not always walk accordingly, verse 30. But strained as any anachronistic reading this as parable of the prodigal son. God is also called the rock of my salvation, verse 26. God is enduring like a mountain. God can only swear on or by himself, by my holiness, verse 35. So high is he, our most enduring witness. The rod in verse 32 is one of office, not for punishment. But the witness may be distant, as was Job's. Verse 22 offers an interesting consideration in poetics, reflective of a theological discussion on neighbors, verse 41, and enemies, verse 42. In verse 22's enemies to wicked, parallelism consequential, on intensification, or is verse 22's enemies to wicked, parallelism consequential, on intensification, or synonymous, i.e., are enemies necessarily wicked for Israel? Foes in verse 23 are crushed, but the Israel KTT means crush fine. How you pronounce it. Perhaps pulverize would be a better translation. This section ends with a cosmological simile describing God the throne, sun, and David's line, moon, Here a footnote has. Tate, 1990, enlarges Viola's rendition of these lines into an interesting envelope of 2 tricolons. Okay, don't ask me what that means because I have no idea anymore. All right, next to last section, crowning the dust. The lament proper of Psalm 89 is found in verses 38 through 45. The God of the covenant is accused of wronging David, and by him all Israel. Here begins a 3-2 accenting called kina. It ought to start yet you, emphatic, although verse 43b of the vocative is passive, and you have not supported it. The other accusations are active. And the verb in verse 39 appears in only one other place in the Hebrew Bible, Lamentations 2:7. The covenant is renounced. This is strong stuff. Paradigmatic parallelism associates the walls in verse 40 with ruins. The edge of the sword, verse 43, is literally the rock of the sword. Contrast the covering of shame in verse 45 with the prior anointing. Just as the days of his youth are cut short in verse 43, one cuts a covenant in Hebrew. Anderson, 1972. The threat is clear to the covenant breakers. Jeremiah 34:18. Who speaks in verse 39 to 52? Need it be the king? The event occasioning the national lament is much in dispute. It seems to be clear that more than the death of a king was at stake. Nothing less than the burning of Jerusalem and destruction of the temple can be meant an exile into Babylon. This would make the dead king Josiah and final redaction sometime after 587 BCE. Some sections of the psalm are clearly deutero-historical. Other sections are considered oracular. Compare verse 4 with Psalm 89, but need not have been composed after 2 Samuel 7 or 2 Samuel 7. Psalm 89 and 2 Samuel 7 may derive from another source. I do actually know what all that means in that paragraph, so crazy what I was getting up to back then in the Berkeley Graduate Theological Union. So last section, Shema. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear Israel, the Lord thy God is one God. Psalm 89 ends with an address to God, verses 46 to 51. It takes the form of a petition for God to Zikr, Z-K-R, Z-K-R. Remember verses 47 and 50, the covenant. It begins with the famous refrain, how long? This was became a African-American spiritual, right? Very nice one. How long, oh Lord, how long? There is no rhetorical question like verse 48 about death, Sheol. This is the question. The tone in the last verses is supported by a different meter, 4 plus 4, also found in the first section of the psalm. Verses 16 through 45 are in 3 plus 3 meter, Anderson, 1978. Commonplaces are here begun. Both simile, wrath burns like fire, verse 46, and hyperbole, vanity you have created for all mortals, verse 47. Chime the note, how long? The genius is in the rhythm of the ending, a sad, weary, mocking processional with which your enemies taunt, O Lord, with which they taunted the footsteps of your anointed. The assonance in the translation is devastating. The doxology, blessed be, that follows is out of tone. The Hebrew for covenant connotes relationship. Therefore, the best use of this psalm is to repair relationships, particularly those under stress. The key is to recognize the extent to which, for Israel, relationship implied duty, and then to examine whether our own relationships might be strengthened by less freedom and more obligation. One key seems to be the notion of enduring. Our relationships are strengthened when they come through a time of stress. Thank you.